This has been, in my opinion, the loveliest Shabbat Shira ever in the history, outside of the original one at the Red Sea, which I understand was fabulous. They served fish. They danced. They had Miriam with her timbrel. No, that was great. Our adult choir, Jackie, Lorraine, what's her name over there? Robert, it's so great to have you back on the bima. You can sit down because I'm going to talk now. And I know that we're already 10 after, but this is such an important parsha. And typically on Shabbat Shira, we skip over the Devar Torah, but tonight we're not going to because there's so much going on in our world, and our Torah, of course, has something to teach us. And the transformation of the Jewish people from the covenant that was made with Abraham as an individual, with Isaac and Jacob as individuals, Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah, with their families as individuals. The covenant that was promised to them by God through visions and dreams, and the promise that God would redeem our people, their children and grandchildren, the generations to come from Egypt. It all takes place in this week's Torah portion. This is the seminal moment of the conception of the Jewish people. The crossing of the Red Sea, the splitting of the Red Sea, the miracle of the Red Sea, and the ultimate crossing of the Red Sea. One of the most beautiful images in the Midrash. It was as if the people were going through a birth canal with walls of water on both sides, coming out, born as a nation. The transformation of our people, everything that we ever talk about at any Passover Seder, when we bless the wine for Shabbat, when we say the words, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, remember, remember, remember the Exodus from Egypt, it all comes from this week's Parsha. And how great, how lovely, how wonderful and exceptional to have this Shabbat setting with this beautiful music to celebrate our liberation as a people thousands of years ago. The transformation into a sacred people occurs not just through miracles, but rather through steady activity, learning, discipline, and communal reinforcement. All of those things are important. Let's talk about the miracle first. Kind of an important thing, right? Because we all grew up learning about the Red Sea, and we saw the Cecil DeMille Red Sea splitting, and we saw the Steven Spielberg Red Sea splitting, and we saw the Red Sea split in the movie Exodus, Gods and Kings a couple years ago. Very cool how they depict, well, the Cecil B. DeMille now just looks old. The special effects were not so good, and for those of us who were able to go to Universal Studios at some point in our lives, it was broken the day we went. But nonetheless, very, very magnificent and miraculous. We as Jews are who we are exactly because we recall our origins through the crossing of the Red Sea, from a slave people to a free people. So much of Jewish practice is designed and implemented to remind us that we owe our freedom to this God of love and of justice, this God of freedom and liberation. We learn that we are the people who wrote chapter and verse through this story that was tattooed on our hearts and on our souls, that in order for us to be free, everyone has to be free. And in order for us to be free and liberated, we must come to terms and understand that our covenant requires of us the pursuit of freedom and justice for all people. It is this miracle that is the cornerstone of our Jewish existence. The sea splits, we go through, the Egyptians, not so good for the Egyptians, right? And we sing the words, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar b'kodesh. Who is like you, Adonai, in deeds and in magnificent wonders? Who is like our God? But there always has to be another side to it with the Jews, because just as soon as they're crossing the sea, barely as they got to the other side, what do?
They complain.
They complain, Ian. Freedom and kvetching. Some people got the message that freedom meant the freedom to complain. And yes, it is in our DNA too, that when we kvetch, we are doing so in the name of our ancestors who split the sea. Barely they got across, like I said, and they were complaining about the lack of water and the lack of food. God invents manna, by the way, in this parsha. They complain about the manna. They complain that they're no longer in Egypt. They actually, in the middle of the crossing, one midrash says, they say, can't we go back? They were so taken, so acculturated with enslavement, with slavery, that they thought it would just be easier to go back. They were saying things, nasty things to Moses, like, oi! I think they actually said, oi. The proof text is in this week's part. Oi, you brought us out here only to kill us. These walls of water are going to come down on us. A lot of kids and adults ask me, rabbis in general, why doesn't God provide miracles anymore? How come God, it seems, stopped providing miracles in the Torah? In fact, I was working with a conversion candidate this week who said, I don't necessarily believe in this magic and the hoopla of the Torah portion, but there is an argument, a fair question, why doesn't God do it anymore? In the words of the Midrash on this week's Parsha, in fact, one of the Midrashim, as the Israelites are kvetching, one of the Midrashim sort of yells at them. This voice of the Midrash comes in and says, have you forgotten all the miracles which God performed for you? So why doesn't God show us miracles anymore? Simply put, they did not work at all. The eyes of the Israelites witnessed the miracles and marvels, but their souls were never penetrated by the message of the miracle. They could see the miracle, but they refused to be the miracle. A miracle that does not lead to action is simply special effects. Moments which are passing and never impact the lives, the kishkas, the souls of other people, of us, so that we can care for other people, so that they too can see and understand what it feels like, tastes like, smells like to be free, to experience a miracle, to experience the miracle of freedom itself. Maimonides teaches us, by the way, that the definition we all use as the definition for a miracle, something supernatural entering into the natural order. But as Jews, Maimonides teaches that miracles are moments when the infinite, meaning God, enters and touches the finite, meaning us and our world. Examples: God tries the Garden of Eden. That doesn't work. Adam and Eve disobey it. God sends a flood in the time of Noah. That fails. The people continue to act like violent people, nasty people. God enslaves the Jews, sends Moses, redeems them from Egypt, does the 10 plagues, or, enacts the 10 plagues, splits the sea. The Jews still act truculently. God gives the Torah at Mount Sinai. It was more than just a laser light show. There was some pyrotechnics, there was thunder and lightning, the ground was shaking. First thing the Israelites do is they build the golden calf. Simply put again, the Bible seems to indicate that miracles don't work. Divine intervention in this sort of historic context in the tradition doesn't work. They have to be, we learn, more than special effects, as I said before. We have to become the miracle, and in order for the miracle to take effect, to work, to make the kind of transformational action that we believe it does in the Torah. To reform human character, Rabbi Bradley Shavit Artson says, takes much more than a miracle, takes much more than special effects. No matter how divine their origin. To transform human behavior requires not grandiose drama, but rather constant learning, constant reinforcement, discipline, community, and yes, constant activism. Opening our mouths and protecting the essence, the values, the morality that the Torah teaches us so that we can share it with the world. And so that, my friends, is most likely why God stopped doing the miracles that we learn about in the Torah. It feels over these last few weeks that in many ways our country needs some divine intervention. It would be a miracle to turn on the television, C-SPAN, CNN, any channel that shows what's going on in our nation's capital. It would be a miracle to see people, our leaders, speaking nicely to each other. It would be a miracle to hear a conversation on a news show program that does not erupt into screaming and yelling and name-calling. It would be a miracle, I can't even believe I'm going to say this, to have leaders who do not resort to Twitter in order to communicate. It would be a miracle if an argument could be made that didn't start and end, not with the phrase, I think or I believe, but I know, with the certainty with which our leaders speak. I want to tell you that the thing that bothers me the most, and has in these last few weeks, has to do with this immigration halt. The idea that a Jewish person, and there are many, who support the position that we should, ad hominem and with whole cloth, ban Muslims from the United States, whether or not that was the intention, implicit or explicit, in the executive order itself, that a Jew would suggest that another group, another religion, should be banned from entry to our country is quite simply as great a shanda as the Israelites complaining about the food and the water and lack thereof as they split and crossed the sea. And by the way, for those Jews and others who would argue, well, what about terrorism? We're preventing terrorism. We as Jews have to dig a little deeper from the sound bites and the oversimplification that this is all about protecting us. For a country that has yet to address, let alone solve and do something about, the daily terrorism enacted on child slaves, we have a lot to learn before we can talk about terrorism from others. For a country that has yet to condemn the daily terrorism placed upon men and women and children in certain communities and neighborhoods by the police, by the authorities, for their race or their sexual orientation, who live among us, we should really think about what terrorism is before we talk about it. For a country that did turn away our ancestors, the Jewish people who were refugees seeking safety in the United States, by the shipload after shipload after shipload coming to America to escape the Holocaust, and were turned away and sent back to the gas chambers, we as Jews have an obligation to say never again to us and never again to anyone who seeks to escape the kinds of violence, the kinds of evil that these very same people today are facing in those countries that we want to enact a so-called ban on. Read this parsha. We were birthed as a nation in Beshalach. We came from the sea, we came out of the water, and entered into a covenant with God, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim. Do not forget. Remember the exodus from Egypt. Why? Because those Muslims, they are you. They are me. They are us. Because those who are persecuted whether it's from abroad or in our country, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, they are you, they are me, they are us. We cannot speak about Jewish values in the abstract and use them only when they are convenient for an argument that we are going to make. To be a Jew is not convenient. It's tough work, and it's not easy. We don't have a God who will intervene. We, my dear friends, we must be the miracle. Such a transformation in our society, because this issue isn't about a person, it's not about an executive order, it's not about a president or a tweet. This is about a policy position that runs 180 degrees antithetical to Jewish values. We're not having a conversation right now. Such a transformation is much more difficult than merely splitting a sea. And I would ask for those of you who are choosing to shout out to listen first. There are other opinions and other ideas and other contexts and other nuances than what you think you know and what you hear. So please listen and think. The reward for such a transmission of taking very seriously the covenant, Zecher Yetziat Mitzrayim, is precisely what God sought more than 3,000 years ago on the shore of the Red Sea. A Jewish community that puts God at the center, Torah at the center, our values and our morality at the center, whether it is convenient or not. It puts it at the center, and through study and practice and activism and development of our sacred heritage, we have something to say. And we can say no. And we can fight with our words. And we can pray, as Heschel said, with our feet. I encourage us on the Shabbat to not look outside for the miracle, but to look within for the miracle. When we say never again, to mean that it applies not only to us, but to others. And while there are evil people in this world, and while I have no doubt there are evil people who wish to enter our country to do us harm, the value, the principle, and the idea, Kol Arevim Yisrael Zeh Bazeh, that we are all responsible for us. The covenant to remember you were slaves, let not others be slaves. You were turned away, let not others be turned away. These are the ideals and the values of a 4,000-year-old people. We have something to say about it. Let us go forth and say and share and speak and learn and educate and hear each other. That will be the miracle. That will be the moment when the infinite enters the finite, so that together we can represent the will of God. Shabbat Shalom. Only because I did your bar mitzvah and your confirmation am I going to allow you to read something from the prayer book.
My name is Matthew Barrett. I was born and raised in this capital. This is in our prayer book. I am a Jew because the faith of Israel demands no abdication of our mind. I am a Jew because the faith of Israel requires all the devotion of our hearts. I am a Jew because in every place where suffering weeps, the Jew weeps. I'm a Jew because at every time when despair cries out, the Jew hopes. I'm a Jew because the word of Israel is the oldest and the newest. I am a Jew because Israel's promise is the universal promise. I am a Jew because for Israel the world is not completed, we are completing it. I'm a Jew because for Israel, humanity is not created, we are creating. I'm a Jew because Israel places humanity and its unity above the nations and above Israel itself. I'm a Jew because above humanity, image of the divine unity, Israel places the unity which is divine.
Amen. Shakach.